What if I told you the bank could actually help you become wealthy? Sounds crazy, right? Because you've probably been taught one simple rule your entire life. Stay out of debt. But what if that advice is only half true? Because some people use loans to buy things that make them poorer, while others use loans to acquire assets that can make them richer. And the difference isn't the loan. It's what they do with the money. But there's a problem. Before Jake ever learns how to make debt work for him, he falls into the exact trap millions of people are already in. And it starts with something that looks completely harmless. A paycheck. Meet Jake. Jake has a decent salary. He works hard. He pays his bills. And from the outside, he looks financially responsible. But every month, something strange happens. His salary arrives and disappears. Mortgage. Car payment. Credit card. Subscriptions. Restaurants. Shopping. And by the end of the month, Jake is waiting for his next paycheck. Again. And again. And again. And then Jake makes what looks like a completely normal decision. He tells himself, I work hard. I deserve something better. That's when the loan appears. And that's where everything changes. One day Jake decides he deserves something better. So he takes out a $35,000 car loan. The salesman smiles. Jake smiles. The new car looks amazing. For a few weeks, Jake feels richer. But here's the problem. The car doesn't produce a single dollar. Instead, it demands money from him every month. Payment. Insurance. Fuel. Maintenance. And depreciation. Jake didn't buy an asset. He bought a monthly obligation. But here's the crazy part. Jake could have borrowed the exact same $35,000 and potentially created a completely different financial outcome. Same money. Same bank. Same borrower. Completely different strategy. Now imagine Jake has another option. Instead of borrowing $35,000 for a car, he uses financing to acquire something that produces income. Maybe a business. Maybe equipment. Maybe a rental property. Maybe another productive asset. Now something changes. The borrowed money isn't simply being consumed. It's being used to acquire something that could potentially generate cash flow. And suddenly, the question becomes different. Not, how much does this loan cost me? But, what can this loan help me produce? And this leads to the first idea that completely changes how you should look at debt. Because the problem may not be debt itself. This is the first big idea. Debt itself isn't the enemy. Unproductive debt is. If you borrow money to consume, the debt works against you. If you borrow money to acquire a productive asset, the debt may work for you. But there's a huge warning here. Because this doesn't mean borrow as much as possible. Absolutely not. In fact, I'm going to show you a simple $100,000 example that reveals exactly where the line is. Because this is where people usually misunderstand leverage. Let's make this painfully simple. Imagine you borrow $100,000. Suppose your total annual financing cost is approximately $7,000. Now imagine the asset you purchase generates $15,000 per year. The asset produces $15,000. The financing costs $7,000. That leaves roughly $8,000 before other costs and taxes. The loan didn't magically create $8,000. The asset did. The loan simply gave you access to the asset. That's the power of leverage. But here's where this gets dangerous. Because leverage doesn't only make good outcomes bigger. It can make bad outcomes bigger too. And the next example is where things can go very wrong. Think about a lever. You apply a small amount of force, and the lever can move something much heavier. Financial leverage works in a similar way. A relatively small amount of your own capital, combined with borrowed money, can give you exposure to a much larger asset. But here's the part people forget. A lever works both ways. And debt does too. Imagine Jake makes the wrong investment. Not a little wrong. 30% wrong. What happens next is the part most people never calculate. Imagine you borrow $100,000 and the investment falls 30%. Your asset is now worth $70,000, but your debt hasn't magically fallen to $70,000. The bank still expects repayment. And now Jake has a problem. The investment went down. The income disappeared, but the monthly payment remained. This is why leverage can accelerate wealth and accelerate losses. And that brings us to the second big revelation. Because debt isn't actually creating the result, it's amplifying it. So here's the second big idea. Debt doesn't create wealth. It magnifies the outcome of the thing you bought with the debt. Good asset plus manageable debt, potentially powerful. Bad asset plus expensive debt, potential disaster. And this is why the smartest question isn't, how much can I borrow? It's, how much risk can I survive? And if you remember only one thing from this video, remember that question. Because before you borrow your next dollar, there are 3 questions you need to answer. The first one is surprisingly simple. Before taking a serious loan, ask yourself, question number 1, will this money produce income or increase my ability to produce income? If the answer is no, slow down. A loan for a vacation doesn't create an asset. A loan for luxury clothes doesn't create an asset. A loan for an expensive watch doesn't create an asset. You're simply moving future income into today's consumption. But even if the answer is yes, there's another question that could completely destroy your plan. Because an investment can be profitable, and you can still lose everything. Question number 2. What happens if things go wrong? This is where most people make a huge mistake. They calculate the upside, but they don't calculate the downside. They say, what if I make $20,000? Instead ask, what if I lose $20,000? What if revenue falls? What if the property is vacant? What if interest rates rise? What if I lose my main source of income? If one bad month destroys your entire financial plan, you probably used too much leverage. But there's still one more calculation. And it's one of the biggest reasons a loan that looks cheap can become extremely expensive. And question number 3. What is the real cost of the loan? Don't just look at the interest rate. Look at everything. Interest, fees, insurance, taxes, maintenance, closing costs, unexpected expenses. Because a loan advertised at one number can cost you much more in reality. And once you understand those 3 questions, you can finally see why 2 people can borrow the exact same amount and end up with completely different financial futures. Now put 2 versions of Jake side by side. Jake number 1 borrows $50,000 to buy something that loses value every month. Money leaves his pocket. Jake number 2 borrows $50,000 to acquire a productive asset. The asset generates cash flow. One person's debt creates pressure. The other person's financing is being used as part of a strategy. Same concept. Completely different purpose. But there's an even bigger problem. Because sometimes, the debt doesn't start with the loan. It starts with a lifestyle. And that's where the middle class trap begins. And this is where many people get trapped. They increase their income and immediately increase their lifestyle. More income, bigger house, more expensive car, more vacations, more payments. Their salary rises, but their financial freedom doesn't. Because every raise gets converted into another monthly obligation. That's the trap. Now imagine doing the exact opposite. Instead of using every raise to increase your lifestyle, you use part of it to increase your assets. And that creates something very different. A wealth loop. Now imagine a different cycle. Income comes in. Some money is saved. Capital is invested. Financing is used carefully. An asset is acquired. The asset produces cash flow. That cash flow helps support the financing. Then the remaining cash flow can be reinvested. And the cycle repeats. That's how leverage can become part of a wealth-building system. Not a shortcut. A system. But don't make the mistake of thinking, Rich people use debt, so I should use debt too. Because that idea can get you into serious trouble. There's something important you need to understand. You may hear, rich people use debt, and think, then I should borrow money too. Wrong. You don't become wealthy simply by copying the behavior. You need to understand the economics behind it. A billionaire may have assets, cash reserves, businesses, insurance, diversified investments, and multiple sources of income. You may not. So the same amount of debt can create completely different levels of risk for different people. So what's the rule? If you want to use debt intelligently, there's a simple principle you should never forget. Here's the rule. Don't borrow money because you can. Borrow money because you understand what you're buying, how it can generate value, how much it really costs, and how you will survive if things go wrong. That's the difference between leverage and financial gambling. And yet, there's one mistake that can destroy even a seemingly good loan strategy. It's not the interest rate. It's not even the asset. It's the lack of a plan. The biggest mistake isn't taking a loan. It's taking a loan without having a plan. No emergency reserve. No realistic cash flow projection. No downside scenario. No repayment strategy. Just, hopefully it works. That's not investing. That's hoping. And now, we can finally answer the question we started this video with. Can a loan actually work for you? The answer is more nuanced than you think. And now we arrive at the real lesson. The goal isn't never have debt. And the goal isn't use as much debt as possible. The goal is control the debt. Use it intentionally. Understand the numbers. Protect yourself from the downside. And whenever possible, use borrowed money to acquire something that creates value rather than simply consuming value. Because there's a massive difference between borrowing to buy a lifestyle and borrowing to build an asset base. So the next time someone tells you, debt is bad, don't argue. Ask them one question. So the next time someone asks, is debt good or bad? Don't answer immediately. Ask, debt for what? Debt for a vacation? Probably consumption. Debt for a luxury car? Consumption. Debt for something productive? Potentially different. The object matters. The numbers matter. The risk matters. And your ability to repay matters. Because ultimately, this entire video comes down to one question. Not, how much can I borrow? But, what can this money do for me? And once you understand that, everything changes. Remember this. Don't let debt buy things that control you. Learn how to use money to acquire things that can produce value. Because financial freedom isn't about looking rich. It's about owning assets that give you more choices, more time, more flexibility, and eventually, more freedom. So don't ask, how much money can I borrow? Ask, what can this money produce? Because if you don't control your debt will control you. And that's the difference between debt that owns you and debt that works for you. But there's one more piece of the puzzle. Because knowing how to use debt is only half the game. The other half is knowing exactly which assets deserve your money. And that's where most people get it completely wrong. So if you want to understand what actually builds wealth, watch the next video. The assets that make you rich and the liabilities keeping you poor. Because once you understand that difference, you'll start seeing your money completely differently.